ABC, no, not that ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation have released a voting poll for the top 100 books of the 21st century. The ABC is doing the Australian version of that, except you can vote for any book across the 21st century. And in today's video, I'm going to go through my top 10 picks of the 21st century. Now, I had a pretty hard time coming up with these votes and selecting and choosing and what to remove. And what I think is tried and true about this list is that these are likely the books that if I woke up in a week's time, I would still pick, but there is absolutely no guarantee. And I think that's an important distinction when you're making a list. Lists are just this fun device that you are able to use in order to talk about a medium. In this case, it's books. You could use music, you could use movies, but the reality is it doesn't really matter that much because art is subjective. Something that someone loves over here is something that maybe I don't like that much, but something I love over here is maybe something they don't like that much. And there's just this real dichotomy that you're allowed to like things and enjoy things and love things, and ranking them is silly, but it's also quite fun. I wanted to go a little bit deeper into this as I pick my votes today, and I will further down the line in another video go over the votes when they are released and what I've read, what I haven't read, what I think I should read, and perhaps we can do a little bit of a series from there. But in the meantime, I'm going to go over my 10 votes that I've picked today. And I decided to vote in this list because since I became a reader again in 2015, I've read over 700 books. And I feel like I've got a pretty broad range of things that I've read and have enjoyed, and figured that I would bring that to you in the case that you find something new or you discover a new read yourself. This is the best books of the 21st century, the Australian version. Here are my votes. The Dry by Jane Harper. This is a book that I must include because this is what catapulted me back into the world of Australian fiction after having some time away. But not only that, it's this phenomenal crime thriller where Aaron Falk goes back to his hometown for the first time in 20 years after his childhood best friend murders both his family and ends up taking his own life. He has to uncover this tragedy, but also has to work through his own difficulties with his hometown and what has happened to him. Jane Harper uses the landscape of this dry, barren country town as a character in itself, and just writes in this really well-paced but also well delivered way. Jane punishes you with the twists and the turns in the kind of way where you think you know what's going to happen and then it turns out you've got no idea at all. And it's this roller coaster of a ride. And I think that anyone reading this book is just going to have such a great time. Jane crushed this one, and that's why it's on my list. Second up, Boy Swallows Universe. I've spoken about Boy Swallows Universe several times, but this is just like a gut punch and a warm hug in the same sentence. I just stole that line off someone that left a comment in my comment on one of my previous videos. It's Brisbane 1985, and Eli Bell has a lost father, a mute brother, a junkie mum, and a stepdad heroin dealing criminal, and that's who he calls his family. Eli Bell just wants to become a good man and love in the best way possible. This is just a story about brotherhood, love, friendship, loss, and grief, and what it is to become a better version of yourself. It is part memoir, part fictional story, and it is just incredible. I could not include this. That's why it's here. Next up is Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life by William Finnegan. It won the Pulitzer Prize for memoir, and it is my most read book in the last decade. William Finnegan in this memoir writes about surfing in this way that it's almost this vessel throughout the course of his life. It starts in his early years and it goes through his years where he travels the South Seas into becoming a journalist and living in cities, and his life with his family and his relationships and his parents. And it's just this beautiful economy of just everything wrapped in one. It's a book about surfing and its purity, but it's also a book about relationships and the connections that you make along the way. And it's a book that, more than anything else, when you feel lost and you are seeking this call to adventure and to be a little bit more and to do a little bit more with your life, it really just calls to those elements, and understanding that a rather successful person has these moments of doubt throughout the whole course of his life, and these moments of beauty, and just how the adventure never ends if you never let it end. This one is just awesome. All right, fourth up is Limberlost by Robbie Arnott. I spoke about this book just a couple of weeks ago, but this book is just, I finished it about 2 months ago, and I just can't stop thinking about it. Robbie Arnott just turns up the contrast and gives you this third person hanging kind of like cloud over his characters and his world, and you feel like you're there in this just beautiful way. I've never felt like I've been inserted into a story in the way that Robbie Arnott inserts me into Limberlost. It follows the story of Ned, who lives on an orchard with his father, and one day his father takes him out on a boat with his two brothers down to the river mouth, and there's a whale and there's a whale tail, and it's just... It also follows the story of Ned over the course of 30 years, and when he's a young tacker, buying a boat and crafting it and turning it into this piece of beauty, and then his later life in his relationships with his children and his wife. And all I can say is that if this isn't on your list, I don't know what you're doing. Fifth on my list is Bear Town by Frederick Backman. It was a novel that just catapulted everything out of me in this really beautiful way. I cried the entire flight while reading it. Bear Town is about a Swedish town on the brink, and its only hope is a junior hockey team to bolster its economy. And it all unravels when there is a violent act of sexual assault by the star player of the hockey team on the general manager's daughter. And it all unravels from that moment on. It explores masculinity, it explores violence, it explores loyalty and friendship, and what it means to be in a place and what it means to love a place more than anything else. And this story felt like a lifeline when I first read it, and it still feels like a lifeline now. The whole trilogy is just... There's not many books in this world that make me cry, and that whole series by Frederick Backman makes me bawl my eyes out. There's 3 books from this next author that I would have liked to choose by Hanif Aradu-Akip, and what I found really hard was that all of them fit this really beautiful purpose that I could have chosen. And I'm still not 100% sure, if I'm being honest with you. I could pick A Little Devil in America on Black performance. I could choose They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, or I could turn around right here and I could choose There's Always This Year. What I think I'm actually going to choose is... this is hard. What I think I'm actually going to choose is A Little Devil in America, as it feels like an urgent project on Black performance. The prose is just beautiful. The story is these series of essays on Black performance, and there's sections on the moon, and there's sections on Black performance, and there's sections on culture, and the writing is just... I can't even tell you how beautiful the writing is. And you could put any one of his novels in here and you could say the exact same thing, but the way the man thinks, reflects, and talks about both Ohio and being black, and being in America is just something out of this world. And if we could all think a little bit like him, I think the world would be a little bit kinder. Anyway, that's why I'm including A Little Devil in America. All right, question 7 by Richard Flanagan is Richard Flanagan at his finest. It is this deeply moving, thought-provoking novel that causes you to come out of it with this deep sense of clarity. Question 7 is this memoir-like novel that causes him to explore the questions that he has in his life, his existence, how he came to be here. He talks a lot about his dad's existence and how he almost died in a Japanese POW camp on the death railway. And if he hadn't have made it through, Richard Flanagan wouldn't exist. He talks about personal history, but also political history. He talks about H.G. Wells and the atomic bomb. But really, he asks the questions that I think matter. Why do we love? Who loves longer? Why do we exist in the way that we exist? And he tries to examine the random and the coincidences that exist within the world and our life. And he does a stellar job of it. Tim Winton's Breath of 2008 is a coming-of-age story following 2 young men, but specifically one young man, as he tries to work out right and wrong, but also tries to discover who he is and balance the line between extraordinary and ordinary while exploring the themes of risk and death and advancement. It's told from the perspective of a paramedic who was once a young boy and his coming of age story throughout that time, and him reflecting on this after all these years. And I just think Tim Winton is just beautiful, and the way that he writes is just significant. And I think that I couldn't not include a Tim Winton novel, and Breath is my favorite by a long way. And honestly, I would talk about it a little bit more, but I spoke about it in my most recent video and I don't want to labor the point. More Tim Winton to come in the coming weeks. Second last one is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey. I know that last week I made the comment that Wild Dark Shore was my favorite. I actually think that for a list like this, I think Once There Were Wolves is the one that I want to include on my list. Once There Were Wolves follows the story of a girl named Inti who is tasked with reintroducing wolves into Scotland. So she reintroduces wolves into Scotland and falls in love with this gentleman, but also has these secrets and this darkness, and the town rejects the idea of the wolves because it takes the cattle and the livestock and it kills them. But there's so much more to it. It is a crime story. It is a mystery. It's a bit of a murder mystery, but it's also this really just beautiful depiction on wolves, but it's also just this really beautiful description on landscape and place and the way the world works. And I think Charlotte McConaughey does this really beautiful job of interweaving this beauty and this rawness into real elements of life. And I think that Once There Were Wolves needed to be on my list because of those things. And the final one on my list is, well, here's the trouble. I'm having a tough time deciding. I've got a few different options and I'm going to read them out to you, and hopefully by the end of this video, when I do the editing, I can produce what I think is my final pick. I actually think that creating this list has been harder than I thought it would be. I had sort of like 7 really clear ones, and I've had a few others that were clear, but I'm also like comparing them with other things, which is what has made it hard. Okay, I've got 7 that I considered for this last position, and I'm just going to read them out. Past the Shallows by Fievel Parrott, beautiful. Woomera by Mark Brandy, iconic. The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan. I've already included a Flanagan in question 7, so I kind of don't think I'm leaning that way, but should be in the list. Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates. This book is just maybe one of the most beautiful pieces of writing I've ever come across, and so I'm going to have a hard time not including that one. Dirt Town by Hayley Scrivener. Iconic crime, murder, thriller novel that I just couldn't put down and think about probably once every couple of weeks. The final one is The Dictionary of Lost Words. I'm about halfway through that one by Pip Williams, and I really think it's fighting to be in place for my list here, and I'll tell you more about it, but if it makes the list, you're going to find out. Anyway, they are my options that I've considered putting in, but I think I need a little bit longer, which I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Choosing the final one was incredibly difficult, and it came down to 2 different options. Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, as that is a book that influenced the way that I write and feel about writing and really push the limits in what you can do. And Past the Shallows by Fiel Perret, which just made you feel everything. It's just this beautiful story wrapped up in this just emotional levity, and I couldn't help but remember how that felt while reading it. And that's why I chose it. But what's more than that is that both of these decisions took me well over a day and a half of sitting there, mulling it over and thinking about it all the time, which just tells you how hard it is to pick 10 books. Anyway, they are my top 10 picks for the 21st century top 100 picks by the Australian Broadcast Corporation. I have had a fun time making this list, and I've had a fun time making this for you guys. I will make a follow-up video once the top 100 books of the 21st century goes live. So make sure you subscribe below, because that is how you are going to see that video. And I will see you back here next week for next week's video. In the meantime, take care, look after yourself, and enjoy your week.